Chris Rawden, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here, Liz. Thanks.
I always start with this question. How do you remember how we've met and gotten to know each other?
What I remember was during the COVID time when I was reading probably more LinkedIn posts than I read at other times. And I came across some of yours and I was just very, it immediately grabbed me with the kind of things you were talking about mental health and overcoming these things. And it just made me go on reading it. And I suppose as I could see, you were a senior partner in a major accounting firm. And I was thinking, I've been working with accountants for years and years. I haven't really come across people who are willing to share in that kind of way. And I just thought I'd really just like to reach out and have a conversation and get to know you a bit. So that's really, I think, what drew me in to contact you at that time.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember back to our first conversation. I do remember ending it feeling like I had been talking to an old friend. I remember on the phone thinking, that can't have been the first time that we spoke. And what I've appreciated is that we have kept in touch. In a sense, our video calls are almost like pen pals catching up. Each time that we've connected, and it started, I want to say we spoke every 6 weeks or so, and I think now it's every couple of months. When we catch up, there are all these sort of yets that come out, things that both of us have been experiencing. Most frequently, it's professionally. Sometimes you do talk about kids and parenting because thankfully you can give me a window into the future. And I think what it is that I appreciate that we have been able to build a friendship from these sort of shared moments in a way that reminds me of pen pals and letter writing and how people kept in touch with correspondence in years past. We do have an always-on culture now. And we have instantaneous communication. We have instantaneous payments. It feels like a lot of instant everything, including ramen. And here we are communicating on a not instant basis. But when we do, the conversations I find are rich and deep and very much like catching up with an old friend. So I've appreciated that as we've gotten to know each other.
Yeah, I would absolutely say the same. I mean, I also remember the first time we spoke being amazed at just how we seemed to connect. And, we could connect obviously around professional issues and things like that because we were often talk about leadership and management of accounting firms and networks and all that kind of thing. But I just felt that, you were somebody who, I could share things with. I could share the challenges of sort of getting my business started and the kind of things I was trying to do. And you always had interesting things to offer, perspectives, and, it's like another lens. And I suppose at that time I was sort of learning how to practice the art of coaching, if I can say that without it sounding too grand, in the sense of being able to listen and listen curiously, listen and, discover, and also to ask questions in a way that would perhaps also have you reflect a bit on what and I would say, what I'm hearing from you is this. And I think that was the way that we were able to kind of get onto each other's wavelengths, because we weren't just exchanging facts and ideas. We were really hearing the words come out of our mouths and sort of thinking, because, one of the things about working with people, I think, as a coach is when someone actually hears themselves say something to someone else, it has a totally different resonance to them just thinking about it for themselves. And people often overlook that. But I mean, that happens without anybody doing anything. It's just simply, as long as there's the space and someone listening. And I think that's one of the things I picked up in our conversations. It was like, oh, that's something I would say to Liz, or that's something I said to Liz. Yes. And I remember there was a silence and then she said that. But I think coming back to what you said at the beginning, I mean, to be able to do this over a virtual platform, we've never actually been able to meet so far. It is incredible. And it's one of the things I do love about the internet. And, the fact that we can meet people in different locations and develop friendships, as you say, quite unexpectedly. And it's a gift to be able to.
It is a gift. I think for us in our conversations, there was some great experimentation in coaching as well, because we were both emerging in this space. And when you recognize a professional peer, someone who you respect. And I think for me, being able to have this very safe space to ask questions, probe a little deeper, and then also have questions asked of me. That I think was really important to developing as a coach, because coaching it's not a programmed exercise. There are great suggestions for questions, there are approaches and sort of formulae that are put out there, but coaching fundamentally is about having developmental conversations, and those aren't easy. I'm curious, how have you grown as a coach in the last, say, 3 to 4 years?
I think a lot of it is about, as you just, I think, highlighted, there are many good questions out there. You can get question banks. You can be taught the kinds of questions to help you get into a conversation with someone and have them look at something. The thing is, it's not like painting by numbers. You have to be able to get onto that person's wavelength. And I think where I've grown, I think, is just by having had my attention drawn to the actual connection that's there with you and someone else. What is it that I can perceive in the energy someone has? What do I maybe need to ask just to check out how they are before I go charging into a conversation of one kind or another? It's really kind of getting where the person's at. I think there's a lot in simply, what's the energy also that I'm bringing to the conversation before we get on the line or meet in the office or whatever it is. And I think I owe a lot to the mediation training I did some years ago, where we were very much shown to look at and understand our emotions, to look at nonverbal communication and really what was going on, perhaps in a small group of people, apart from the spoken word. It was very much to get us to think about the other elements in the communication, apart from simply what comes out of someone's mouth. I suppose the extreme example would be when what someone actually says is in direct contradiction to their body language or some nonverbal signal. And the fact that actually it's the body language and the nonverbal that speaks far louder than actually the thing they're saying. And curiously, I just actually had an example of this earlier. Lane and my partner and I had gone out. We came across a little Moroccan food store that we hadn't seen before. And the people came out and greeted us and encouraged us to come in and have a look. And then the cook came out from behind the counter and said, "What would you like?" Well, we hadn't gone planning to get anything. And so I politely just tried to say, "Look, I'm very interested. It's nice to see the place, but we just eaten." This lady said, "Well, you're very welcome. It's very nice to see you." But it was quite clear from the body language that it was a disappointment that we weren't going to get anything at that point. And it reminds me of exactly that kind of contradiction, this sort of paradox between the facial expression of the body language and the spoken word. And what is it that speaks loudest?
Something that I've observed, speaking of observation, that I've observed with you in really the last year is that you've gotten much more personal in how you're approaching your business and coaching, and you're doing it through the things that interest you. So music, for example, musical performance, which is in your background. One of the things that's been surprising and fun for me is to see how these elements of your background and experience that people wouldn't necessarily know if they just came across you on LinkedIn or they met you at a networking event. They've really started to inform how you go about your business. I'm just curious, what brought about that evolution? Because it's very personal. It seems like it is something that has grown as you've become more comfortable in your role as coach, advisor, and consultant.
Yeah, I think it's a lot about comfort zones. There's no stretch in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the stretch zone. And there's certainly no comfort in the panic zone. I think music and musical performance are always a very good forum for testing yourself, if you like. Because in one way, we all learn, I suppose, as student musicians to overcome the nerves of playing in public to a certain extent. What starts off probably when you're starting as a very young child, what can be a bit overwhelming, gradually begins to become familiar. It may not become easy, but it's kind of, you get used to it. But I think that there's never a time when you go out to perform, however much you've done it, when you don't have the butterflies in the stomach and you don't have that tightening of the breath and some sense of, gosh, well, why does this room look so different to yesterday when it was just a practice room and I was in here rehearsing? Now it's like it's spinning and, what's the difference? And all these things, I suppose, in later life, I learned about through this understanding better the central nervous system and how it kicks in and how adrenaline functions and how these different hormones come and really the role that plays. I suppose it's kind of like a bit of a demystification of what we have to do if we're going to actually accept how we feel in a tense performing situation. And it has a lot of parallels with things that you can help people with in terms of then managing stress, for example, in managing difficult meetings or a termination conversation with someone or some conversation they're really not looking forward to having. Already the thing that's taking their attention and then is leaving them less effective to be able to actually be with the other person or the people in the room. And that's a bit the thing, musicians, you can sometimes think that the energy you feel when you walk on stage is all about the audience. So you look at them and you kind of think, well, they don't look terribly enthusiastic or they don't really seem very up, so that's cast a downer on the thing. No, all of that's happening in your head. And what you could consider instead is what's the energy I'm bringing with me when I walk in here? What do I want to transmit? And I think that that's a better place to stand because it's one thing. We have some control over how we walk in, what we want to convey, the facial expression we want to give before we play anything. Now, how they respond to that, who knows? But there's a much better chance they're going to respond to it well if we come on with the sort of energy we would like to see and receive ourselves. And it reciprocates, there's mirror cells and all this kind of thing, mirror neurons that have that ability to transmit this kind of sense of joint attention. And, this idea that when you're sort of all focused on something together, you suddenly feel part of a huge thing. And you no longer feel like a separate and distinct being. And there's another one sitting next to you and there's another one on this side and there's rows of them. No, suddenly you feel connected. It's the same if you're in the audience. And it's to some extent the same when you're a performer in an orchestra. When the orchestra starts, it's that sense of connecting together. You don't just feel like number whatever. You are part of some sound together in a joint way, focused through the conductor and the gestures and everything else. I just think there's so many parallels in this with what people can do to experience expression in their work, how they can be authentic in some way, how they can actually step out of what they might think are the right ways to do certain things and actually connect with their own self-expression, which is ultimately going to leave them in a more powerful place as a communicator.
I had my colleague and friend, Dr. Sunny Lampasso, on the podcast somewhat recently. She works with DJs. And she said so many things that resonated with what you just said in entirely different musical genres.
Yeah.
The DJ on stage performing and reading the audience and trying to engage the audience while at the same time being behind all of these electronics. And also being surrounded by people and yet in a very profound way alone.
Yes.
And thinking about this in the musical context, and then as you said, also the human tendency, it was Charles Horton Cooley who described this in 1902, actually, as the looking glass self. How much time we spend moderating our behavior based on what we think other people think about us.
Yeah.
And we have no way of knowing what they're actually thinking. And in all likelihood, because they're human, they're probably just thinking about themselves.
Exactly.
But we adjust our behavior based on what we think they're thinking about us, and they're doing the same. Meanwhile, everybody's really just focused on themselves.
Yeah.
And breaking through that noise. And as you said, helping people to step into their space, to command their audience, to be able to demonstrate their own gifts, whether it is in leadership or it is in music, is a profound thing that we can do. And so I'm fascinated by the resonance between these systems, these areas that seem disparate, musical performance and business leadership, when in reality, they have so many connections between them. And there's so much that we can learn by studying one to understand the other. I'm curious, what is your musical background? How did you come to that?
Well, I was 7 at the time, and I think we had the opportunity at this school to learn an instrument, and there was a brass teacher visiting every Tuesday, as I seem to remember. So somehow I found I'd missed the boat, discovered other people were already having their lessons. And so I went and asked about it, and I then had a chance to go and learn cornet. It was in small groups. I think there were 3 of us with a teacher there, and that's how I started. also having piano lessons. My mother had learnt the piano when she was a child and she wanted to come back to playing. And I think what happened was that teachers had had a pay rise that year. So somehow my parents were able to afford to get a piano and they got one. And so we had piano lessons. And I did love the piano really fairly much from the beginning. And I liked playing the cornet. But I think it was really only when I got to 12, 13, and I heard some very good young ensembles, and there were some teachers around who were directing various ensembles in the county, some very inspiring people, and suddenly it was like, gosh, it can sound like that. It was fascinating to then join the county youth band as a cornet player some years later. It all came about rather quickly because I'd joined the training band, and then the concert band, which was the main band out of the three, was going to go to Vienna on a tour in the summer, and needed another cornet player. The conductor phoned up my mother and said, would Christopher like to come to Austria with us? And so I'm not sure which of us was the more excited, my mother or me. But that was just I was wonderful at the time because I was suddenly thrown in with all these people who were much better players than me. They were also a bit older. I was one of the youngest. But it was a great way to learn on a sort of social occasion, sort of being away for a couple of weeks, going to another country, going through different cultural experiences, getting to know people I didn't know very well at that time, learning some lessons about how to get on with people and share rooms and all this type of thing. So I think that was really a great start to making me fascinated in music and wanting to work at it, as well as the piano, which I also really liked. And my cornet and trumpet teacher very much encouraged me to play the piano as well.
And how has music stayed with you over the years?
It's never been absent. I mean, it's always been something. It was quite a difficult decision at the age of 21, after I'd done a degree in music, to really decide what to do. I mean, in one way, everybody I knew was going in for music, but I didn't feel really drawn to it at that time. I think having done an academic music degree as well, which had some practical elements in it, but I think it opened my mind up to other things. And I think at that time, the life I wanted was more one where I'd be doing more of a regular career type role, 9 to 5, or, during the day, rather than working in the evenings like musicians tended to and being off during the day for practice and everything. So that was really the point at which I thought, no, there are other options. And I suppose from a risk perspective, my parents and other people were much more cautious about opting to do something like music unless you were really, felt there was absolutely nothing else you could do. Interestingly, when I got to about the age of 30 and I was still had some very good piano lessons and trumpet lessons then at one of the music schools in London. It was at that time when I was improving quite a lot, and I thought maybe this would be something still of interest to me to do more professionally, but it wasn't when I was younger.
You've in some ways come a long way from musical performance, and at the same time, you're still doing so many of the practicing, in a way, so many of the same skills that you did when you were growing up with a life in music. Now you're imparting the lessons that you learned and the insight and the wisdom that you gained from all of this extensive musical training and practice and performance in a different context, in a business context. When people kind of review your resume and they see what you've done, what is it behind that you most want people to know about you?
I suppose it's all about expression and expressing yourself. A lot comes in words, I suppose. I mean, I think it was very clear to me that I wasn't really a numbers person. I much preferred words. I got told off a lot during my earlier career about writing emails that were far too long. And, always everything had to be short. And I always found that really infuriating because I suppose I tend to be a naturally sort of expansive person. I think I've learned ways to do this, but I suppose people probably wouldn't make a natural connection between music and other professional involvement with things. They tend to see musicians as being somehow a bit over there somewhere. And I think I did as well at one point. And I was quite surprised and pleased once when I did an interview years ago to be doing teacher training in music. And I remember the woman who interviewed me said, well, of course, you'll see obviously the connection between having done a study of music and professional life. And I thought, will I? That sounds interesting. So I said, what kind of thing do you mean? And she said, well, for example, when you're practicing your instrument, you have to set yourself a goal for that hour or so of practice. You're not expecting to be able to play, suddenly at a completely different level, but you're working on something in enough detail to be able to improve it within that time. That's a little bit the same as business planning and working on a certain aspect of something. It shows that you can master your time. It shows you've got self-discipline. And I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. I've never thought of trying to sell musical skills in that kind of way to people who are not musically involved. But the parallels were very clear, particularly this whole thing about self-discipline, having your mind very clearly on a certain objective for that session, this type of thing, the same as you might for a meeting. You'd have a purpose for the meeting, you'd have some objectives and that kind of thing. I kind of ran with that idea, and I've always tried to use that when people have given me a bit the impression that music's a sort of specialist thing for people who are completely different to other people, I suppose.
It strikes me that that is something that's applied to many people in any sort of artistic endeavor or approach. This idea that there's the worthwhile pursuit, and then there are the ephemeral pursuits. And as you've shown very much in the last year, I've been so taken by your newsletter, because you really are bridging these two areas that, as you just said, people often will see as disparate, and they will be dismissive of the artistic side. And you've been consistently providing very insightful newsletters that really ask people to think about themselves in performance in some cases. It seems to me that you're really drawing on a lot of this prior experience, and you're also melding it with the experience that you've had in business. And you also seem really excited about it. So what that you're working on right now is giving you energy?
I had a certain surge of energy very recently when we had a concert with another orchestra that I've never played with before, which was a very good standard, I have to say. And we did a fantastic concert to a full-size audience in one of the major halls here in Brussels a couple of weeks ago, sponsored by the Polish representation to the EU. So it was a Polish program. We did one of the Chopin piano concertos and various other pieces. But I think just suddenly stepping back into an ensemble of that standard, having not really played at that level for a while, in a group at least, was really a great source of stimulation to me. And I really went to work on my own practice and preparation and everything in a way, just like I probably more used to do as a student when I played in some very good ensembles a long time ago. And I was doubly pleased to sort of think, well, I can still do that. And I have learnt those ways to prepare and mentally prepare as well. So that was a great experience, just to connect with other musicians at that level. The thing I'd really like to do now is to bring something more together for groups of people in terms of confidence building, particularly under pressure, whether it's, for example, running a difficult meeting or facilitating or giving a speech. People often that I work with seem to struggle with some of that, at least not struggle in the sense of getting their content right. A lot of accounting partners and other people are extremely good at that. They prepare very well. What they tell me is they don't actually enjoy the experience at all. They get up there, they stick very much to their notes and their slides, and as long as they can do that, they're happy to get their half an hour over with and get out as soon as possible, and hopefully there's a taxi outside taking them somewhere nice. And I'm sort of saying, no, but let's look at this. What would it be like for you, instead of having to survive this moment, if you could really live it to the full, if you could really actually get energized by the fact that you're the person standing there connecting with an audience, you're imparting your knowledge, you're sharing something with them that's important and valuable for them, you're getting them involved in some way, maybe you give them a chance to ask questions and you clarify some things on the spot. What would that be like if you could actually enjoy that whole dynamic rather than thinking, oh goodness, the sooner this is over, the better? That's a bit, this whole thing behind why I call the company Live Your Performance. It's about living something rather than surviving something. I think that's where I'm getting to now, to have some small group sessions online, to do something in person as well, would be an opportunity for different people to share perhaps where they're challenged, to receive some coaching, to hear from others in the group, and to feel seen. I think one of these things that's very important is a human need to feel seen, to feel heard, to be noticed. So many meetings and that in whatever quality of organization start by going straight into the agenda items and the content and everything. Okay, there might be a superficial welcome, but there's very rarely a sense of going around the table, people really seeing who's there, greeting people, greeting each other, being presenting someone. And that act of doing that can make such a difference to how people feel in that room together. It's the way that the connection is built. And if you build a stronger connection, then you're going to be much more successful when you come down to the agenda items than if you're simply like one person on a screen looking at the screen with 12 other people and one person's doing all the talking or whatever the setup is. So I definitely think there's a lot of room to share that kind of idea. and perhaps inspire people to go away and try those ideas in their own meetings and their own opportunities and how they connect. Because I often think the connection, especially anything to do with nonverbal and anything like this, it gets very overlooked and it's not really understood. I remember years ago when I did an English course, teaching English as a foreign language, there were 12 of us, and we were given an icebreaker exercise, which was called Find Someone Who. And we were given a length of paper with a sentence on. So it was a way that you just had something to ask. You just go up to different people and ask them. And it was a way quickly of getting to know who was who did what, in a very friendly, unthreatening way. And stuff like that can be so good, I think, at breaking the ice in what can otherwise be rather stiff situations where people don't quite know how to get into the dynamic in a comfortable way.
You certainly hit on something that is a flashpoint in many corporate settings, and that is the icebreaker. It serves a really valuable purpose. There's a lot to be said for the purse check-in. What's going on with you today? And oftentimes in meetings, people will have reactions that feel outsized to the situation. They get very upset about something. And it doesn't seem to anyone else like it's something really worth getting that worked up about. And it's because they're not actually worked up about that. They have something else on their mind. Maybe it's their family. Maybe it's something that happened to them that morning. Maybe something happened in a different meeting and they're carrying that with them. And as a result, their whole behavior, their whole demeanor is changed because they have that going on in their head. And as we were talking about earlier, people assume that everything is about them. And so this one person's reaction suddenly takes over the whole meeting. And people are convinced that it's about the thing that they say they're upset about. In reality, that's actually probably not the thing. They may be a little upset about it. There may be something that they'd like to see different. But so often we are carrying a lot else with us. There are many words for it. You can call it baggage. There's all sorts of different terms. But as you said, when you start with a check-in, what's going on with you today? How are you coming into this? If you don't feel seen, it's unlikely that you're going to also feel heard.
Yeah. No, I think those are really special things. If you're in an organization that can somehow open itself up and try and provide that, it makes such a difference. And it's not about necessarily succeeding with it particularly or getting it right, but the willingness to at least venture into that territory rather than play safe, I think speaks a lot of volumes for an organization that's able to try and trust itself to do that.
Chris, who are the people you want to be seeking you out right now? Who do you want to be talking to?
Quite frankly, I would like to be talking to business leaders, their teams, people who are facing challenges of confidence. Perhaps they are in new roles that they've just entered. My particular interest, obviously, is in people working in international roles of one kind or another, but not only. But it's more the interest in how you need a different sort of skill set if you're communicating in an international context to if you're communicating in a domestic one that's familiar to you. And I've seen so often people who've been excited to get into international work, but then very quickly been almost put off because suddenly some things that seemed very easy in their old role seem much more difficult now. When you're dealing with member firms across all these geographies and things, and each one perhaps has a slightly different way of working. There are different legal systems, language comes into it, times, expectation, response times, all these kind of things that are set in some way centrally, but exactly how everybody adheres to them. It's really knowing how to get into that and how to call out differences, but in a way that's respectful so that the other side knows, oh, that's different. We've done something different to what this person expected, but they're not making us wrong for it. They're simply curious about how come we do it this way and they do it that way. That's kind of like a really instructive thing to learn, because so often I had people ringing me up and saying, oh, I've had this country or other on the phone and this was bad and they shouldn't have done this. I sort of thought, but let's just stop here a minute. Firstly, I haven't observed either party talking to each other, so I don't know. I'm only hearing what one's telling me. We have to really stop and think, okay, what did we bring to the party? Where's our responsibility in this? How did we speak to the other side? And what did we clarify? Did we make a clear agreement about a deadline and then it wasn't met? Or was it rather left vague and now we're disappointed that the deadline we had in mind hasn't been met? But we weren't very rigorous, were we? So maybe we have ourselves to blame as much as anyone if anything like that happens. What I'm noticing with the leaders I work with is that they're often saying they they find coaching very different to what they expected. What they expected was something more like training, I think, and to be given advice, to be given a set of do's and don'ts, really. The idea that they are now inquiring into themselves and learning to self-reflect, and they are discovering what's really driving them in a certain way, or what's driving them to avoid something, or driving them to spend more time on one kind of activity than another. Those are the sort of revelations that a coach can help someone discover, but only if the other person's willing to really venture there and feels safe to do so. And so I'm really happy to get the feedback that actually it's providing more than people expected it would, because it's not what they were thinking it was going to be. And actually, it gets them in touch with their own strengths. It gets them in touch with their own power stations, so to speak. And if I'm able to do that for anyone, I'm delighted that they get that result, because it is their result. They have put the work in. They've done the reflective exercises. They're the ones who've gone into some uncomfortable territory, looked at things that firstly they perhaps were a bit skeptical about. Sometimes people are questioning the value of understanding their emotions better. But gradually, as they get into it, they realize, well, I've got to confront my emotions anyway, and they are driving me in some way. I might as well actually see which emotions they are and have some sense of recognizing them, because then I can actually start to manage them, rather than that they're this blind force that's behind my shoulder, sort of pushing me one way or another and trying to resist. And then, of course, more sort of problems get created from that. I'm always happy when people say, actually, Chris, when you started talking about the value of emotional intelligence, I was very skeptical. But I have to say, even just after a week of looking at some of the things you've given me, I've seen so much. And that is where the value is really to be found, I think, because the better you understand yourself emotionally, the better you can understand your teams and the people around you, the easier you can read a room, and that creates a closer connection. There isn't like this wall of distance between you and other people anymore. And I think if leaders have that capability, people build closer trust. They want to open up. They want to work with people and that person. And that's the goal ultimately.
And that embodies exactly who I know you to be. And I love hearing the change in your voice, the energy that comes in when you talk about your work like this. Because in knowing you, I've come to know someone who values human connection deeply. You are brimming with emotional intelligence, and it really comes through as empathy and compassion and care. So I'm very excited to see your practice continue to evolve and you just continue to grow. And I'm really looking forward to our friendship continuing and eventually meeting in person.
Well, thank you very much. That's very kind of you. And I think, Liz, you've really got exactly where I'm coming from. I mean, a lot of it is about trying to understand where the other people are, where they're coming from. And I've often said that. I learned that through some what I thought were really great consultants years ago, when we were trying to do some growth projects and things like this in the organization. It was groundbreaking when someone actually said, we have to start where people are, not where we want them to be. And in a sense, we all knew this, but we didn't realize that wasn't what we were doing. We didn't realize how impatient we'd become and how we'd set a bar in a certain place and all we were doing was beating people over the head who hadn't reached that point yet. Been so useful to me. And I always try to bring that to people when they are frustrated with their own progress or their own sense of where they are with something. I try to actually get them to evaluate where they actually are already, and the fact that they can actually already see certain things that are going to be helpful, that we can work with. And yes, we start from there rather than just bemoaning the fact that we aren't already two kilometers further down the road. Because once you actually get that sense across with people, of course, progress is fast then, because people feel seen, they feel inspired, they feel accepted for who they are. And then they put the work in. It's a bit this whole thing about the emotional brain working so much more quickly than the cognitive one. If you could figure out certain things, but no, the emotional brain will be much quicker. And that's why our body language will give us away. And that's why if we can inspire ourselves to walk into a room with the energy we want to bring into it, we will be pleasantly surprised by the way the people on the other side of the door respond when we go in. Rather than not thinking about any of that, suddenly just opening the door and going in, and our heads miles away, and then we wonder why we don't get a rapturous welcome. It's worth trying to join the dots, I think.
And there's no better line to end on than that. It is worth learning how to connect the dots. And I think the other piece you brought out for listeners to take with them is to think about the energy we bring into the rooms we enter, to the spaces that we inhabit. Is the energy that we're bringing the energy we want to bring? Is this the energy that's going to move us forward? And if it's not, we don't always have the energy we want to have. Sometimes when we recognize that, first, just being able to recognize it itself is a power. And then being able to take some time for ourselves and reset our energy and understand what it is, check in with ourselves.
Yeah.
And understand where is our energy coming from today, and what do we need to do to be able to show up with the energy we want to bring.
Yeah. Because that's also about putting ourselves back in the driving seat again, rather than focusing on what's over there and what they're doing.
Oh, but it's so much easier. Oh, it's so much easier to critique others than it is to turn the mirror on oneself.
Yeah. But I think if we are authentically wanting to learn and develop ourselves, whatever frustrations sometimes come with things not being the way we want, if we can be curious about why other people are the way they are and try and understand that, put ourselves in their shoes, it's valuable for us. It has a self-interest that can't be denied, but is actually a useful one. But thank you for the questions, because you have again shown that you are able to ask questions that invite anyone to be able to reach inside and say what's authentic for them. And, that's a great gift you have. So I wouldn't have been able to enjoy this conversation if you hadn't been able to be able to do this. And you have. So thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And thank you for your friendship. And thank you for joining me for this conversation and for more conversations to come.
And let's have many more conversations, because it's certainly enriching and I value your perspective very much.
Same. Thanks again.
Thanks a lot.